Hi. How come I can't hear you?
Because I wasn't talking.
Oh, okay. Let me just check. Okay, the volume is full. Okay, hi everybody. I think we could start. Okay. We've been wanting to do this for a while. I didn't think it would happen this soon. Thank you so much, Rabbi Taub, for joining us. I'm going to start to just introduce myself. I'm a licensed social worker here in Lakewood, New Jersey, and the biggest population that I pretty much work with are adults that were impacted as children through childhood trauma, whether it was addiction, whether it was underdeveloped parents, and this topic comes up again and again. And we're going to try to talk about the spectrums of it, but it's something that really comes up a lot when dealing with parents, and oftentimes when someone is trying to heal from their past and they start trying to make boundaries with parents, with themselves, they often end up having a lot of different things that come into play where there's a lot of questions. And as religious Jews, it's a complicated factor because besides for therapy, we have the chiyuv of Kibud Av V'Eim, and that's why we have Rabbi Shais here tonight, who's a rabbi, scholar in residence of Chabad in 5 towns, director of Soul Words, which we'll try to speak about and address a little bit after the live. And he has a fabulous website and a WhatsApp chat that we'll talk about too. He's a sought-after speaker and lecturer all over the world. And of course, one of my favorite Ami columnists, and I believe that many other people enjoy. And one of the things that Rabbi Taub can do is he has such a clarity when it comes to describing certain things that, I don't know, I definitely can't compete with that. So what I want to start with is boundaries. You know, we hear that word often, and, you know, it's like a very overrated, and we hear people say it all the time. But what are boundaries? Boundaries are guidelines, rules, limits that a person creates to identify reasonable, safe, permissible ways for other people to behave toward them and how they will respond when someone passes those limits. So we know that we can come across different situations where somebody might cross a boundary and they don't respect it. And we'll start with a simple thing, a neighbor that just constantly walks into your house. You want to try to enforce a boundary with them. You basically tell them, you know, I would really appreciate if you would knock on the door before you come into my house. And then hopefully a relatively healthy person will apologize and say, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize. And then if they're not such a healthy person, sometimes we have to enforce it in a stronger way. But what happens when it comes to parents? And that's where we needed Rabbi Taub, because I'm just a therapist and I can guide people. But one of the things that I always try to help my clients with is to connect to Rabbanim. There's no one size fits all, and I'm sure Rabbi Shais Taub will tell us that whatever he's going to speak about is not for every individual basis. I'm sure you're going to give us, and you could start with Rabbi Taub, you could speak a little bit about that before we even start talking about this, of, you know, it's not like a one size fits all.
Definitely. That is the main disclaimer, is that nothing here is meant to give practical guidance to anyone. Before you go off and do anything based on anything you hear, you have to consult with your Rav. This is just food for thought, for clarity, for perspective. But before you implement anything, definitely speak to your Das Torah. You must.
Okay, thank you. So the topics that we want to speak a little bit about tonight is, so let's say I need to put up certain boundaries with my parents. Now, I want to just go back as a therapist. I just want to speak about how do we even learn how to have boundaries. Our parents teach us how to have boundaries as children, what's acceptable in our home, what's not acceptable in our home. And as we develop and as we go through the different stages of development, we often are given more space to make decisions and things on our own. And part of the way that our parents help us with that is they respect it, they give us the space, and acknowledge the boundaries that we start making for ourselves. Now, what happens if we start feeling like it's not really happening? And we could talk about a very simple scenario. We could talk about my mother loves me very much, and she just pops into my house whenever. Now, Some people love it. For some people, it's going to be a problem. And when our boundaries are not respected, it will cause a lot of damage. We'll have shalom problems. Sometimes it can affect our children. Sometimes it can affect our emotional well-being. So where do I even start? What do I actually do? And a big part, that I'm hoping to discuss tonight with you, Rabbi Taub, is that we have a lot of preconceived notions. Kibud Av V'Eim, oh my goodness, what am I supposed to do? When do I know that I have to call a Rav? When do I know that I have to reach out to a rabbi? How am I supposed to do that? And maybe you could step in and tell us a little bit and start us off a little bit of like, what would that first step be? Being that I might even think to myself, like, why would I even call a Rav? I'm scared to, like, that's not even the right thing to do. I should just keep doing this again and again, even though it's harming me.
Okay. So you want to start with that? You want to start with?
Simplest example. A simple example.
Meaning,
my mother just keeps on popping in on me. And I really don't want her to. And I don't know what to do. I'm afraid to put that boundary. I feel like it's not going to be Kibud Av V'Eim. I'm not supposed to say that to this, to her. What am I supposed to do? I'm afraid of doing that.
Okay. So first of all, let's just talk about a typical normal situation. Normal situations are always easy to deal with. Sometimes we don't know what normal is. Sometimes it's good. It's a reality check to hear what's normal. Oh, that's normal? Oh. There's an old joke, by the way. They there are Jewish jokes about Jews, that poke fun at Jews. So then there's a whole genre of jokes called Gentile jokes, which are Jews telling jokes that poke fun at the idiosyncrasies of Gentiles. So I'll tell you one of them. Okay. A Gentile, 40-year-old man, calls his mother and he says, "Ma, I know we had plans to have lunch tomorrow, but something came up and I can't make it." And his mother says to him, "Okay." That's the joke. Obviously, the joke being that she didn't even react. She didn't even say anything, right? Okay. And by the way, what's the joke is really, it's a reverse. The Jewish mother would say something. She would guilt him. And that's obvious. It's a stereotype, but on the other hand, stereotypes usually have a basis in truth, meaning that even the normal, healthy situation, Jewish mother who hears from a child, "Oh, I'm not going to be able to make it for lunch," you're going to get some type of a reaction. Okay, so at any rate, but let's talk about normal. Normal is a relative term, or like my mother.
Relatively normal.
Relatively normal. My mother told me there are two kinds of people in the world. There are normal people, and there are people that you really know. So there are no such thing as truly normal people, right? It's like when you're trying to make a shidduch, right? And no, that family's no good. That family's no good. Oh, they're good. And then you realize the one family you said was good is the one you don't know. You never heard of them before. Oh, so they're good. You can make a shidduch with them. If you know anybody, you realize that they're crazy too. Okay. At any rate, but let's talk about relatively normal. In a relatively normal situation, an adult child would be able to have a conversation with a parent and just without any emotion, and certainly not with conveying any type of annoyance or frustration, just communicate what their needs are. So they would tell the parent, to use your example, it's difficult for me to run.
When you just walk into my house.
If you can say it in a positive way. Could you call before you're coming over, or something like that, right? Okay. And in a normal situation, a parent would say, "Oh, okay, fine, sure," and that would be it. So by the way, do you know that on a box of kosher salt? See, when I studied to be a Rav, we had to learn malicha. We had to learn, mostly it's Yeridea, it's kashrus stuff, because, that's what a Rav, at least in the old days, a Rav was, kashrus. Now it's all types of stuff. But still, the smicha, the smicha test was all Yeridea stuff. So we had to learn, a whole bunch of halachas and malicha. But you know that on a box of kosher salt, there is a little square about this big, and it has the hilchas malicha l'chatchila. In other words, if everything goes normal, not that anyone salts their meat anymore because you buy it prepackaged, pre-salted when it's packaged, but I'm saying the rules, the laws for salting meat, if everything goes l'chatchila normal the way it's supposed to go, it's like a tiny little, it's like the size of a postage stamp on the side of the box of kosher salt. So then why do we have chapters and chapters and chapters of hilchas malicha? That's for when things don't go according to plan. When things get messed up. So the simple thing is, you say to your parent, hey, you know, it'll be a lot better for me. We'll enjoy your visits a lot more if you call first. You know, and then you could even say, it's up to you. If you call beforehand, somebody would say, no, not enough to call before. If you call the day before, you know, or if they're from out of town, if you tell me a month in advance, then we could really prepare for you. And that's fine. That's whatever you want to say. That's what you can say. And in a normal situation, that's going to be heard and everything's going to be fine. So, but I don't think that's what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about when.
So what happens when our boundaries are not being respected, and they're pretty respectable boundaries? It's not like someone's trying to be difficult or trying to, you know, be complicated and do something completely out of whack. Just regular things where they feel like their boundaries are not being adhered to.
Yeah. So let's talk about it like this. The famous Kibud Av V'Eim story that everybody knows, you hear as a child, and we all tell our children, the archetypical Kibud Av V'Eim story is David ben Nisina. David ben Nisina was a non-Jew, and he and his family, I suppose they had some type of a jewel business or precious stones. And the Chachamim came to him to buy stones for the big day Kahuna. And the key to the box where the stones were kept was under his father's pillow, and his father was napping. And he said, no, I'm not going to wake up my father. And they thought he was a good businessman. They thought he was haggling, so they raised the price. No, I can't wake up my father. And they raised the price more and more and more. And he refused, and he wouldn't, no matter what price they set, he wouldn't take it. And then he was rewarded later that a red heifer was born to him, and then he was able to sell it to the Jews for much more than whatever he lost out on. Okay. Here's a question. It was a family business. Why wouldn't the father want him to wake him up? He says, I can't wake up my father. Your father wouldn't want you to wake him up for $1 million? It was the father's business. The father would want him to wake him up. It's an interesting question, huh? Nobody ever asks this. You tell the story to the kids, and we just overlook this point. So I'll tell you something. There's another story of David ben Nisina. It's about his mother. It says that David ben Nisina was being honored by the Roman government, and at the ceremony, his mother came over and humiliated him. She ripped his cloak, and she spit on him and cursed him, and he didn't react. So there's a Dorish Moshe. Moshe Feinstein's Dorish Moshe has homiletical explanations from the Gemara. He says there, why did David ben Nisina's father not want him to wake him up? He says, we don't know, but we know his mother wasn't well. She was mitzrefes bedaita. She was mentally deranged.
Wow.
So Reb Moshe says, probably just like we know that the mother was mentally ill, the father was mentally ill as well. So the archetypical story of Kibud Av V'Eim that we tell, okay, and whether or not this is for codifying as halacha or not, that's a different discussion. But I'm just saying the fact that this is the archetypical story that we tell, and that the sages hold up as an example. Again, whether this is codified as halacha or not is a separate discussion. But the fact that this is the example that's held up, that's revered, that's extolled, and what is it really a story of? The archetypical story is a story of a person who has two mentally ill parents. Okay, so first of all, let's just think about that. The archetypical story is a story of parents who are not well. Parents who are not behaving in a normal way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's not like we have to wonder and say, what if? That's the story. The story is about parents who are not well mentally. Now, let's get into the reaction. What was David ben Nisina's reaction? It was a non-reaction. It says that when his mother came and humiliated him publicly, he didn't respond. And that, incidentally, is codified as halacha. In Shulchan Aruch, it says that, and it gives another example as well, which is a hypothetical. The David ben Nisina example is a story that actually Maisa Shahaya. Then there's another example, which is a hypothetical example. If your parent takes a bag of money, there's a whole discussion. Is it your money? Is it their money? Is it their money that you're going to inherit? But they take a bag of money and they throw it in the sea. And then, of course, there's a question, is it before they did it? It's after they did it. Maybe it's already up katan. The whole thing is over. But the point is, this is the salient point. What is codified is that you're not allowed to show that you're disturbed by it. So in other words, what is halacha demanding of you? It's interesting.
So a child is saying is the halacha is that a child is not allowed to show a parent that they're disturbed by their behavior?
What it says. Where do you find in any other mitzvah that you're not allowed to show that you're disturbed by something? Let me ask you something. If somebody says, oy vey, I don't want to put on tefillin, this is so annoying, this is such a burden, and they say this as they're putting on tefillin, they put on tefillin. Now maybe they're lacking kavonas ha-mitzvah, fine, but nowhere does it say that by being upset about it, that it diminishes the fact that you've done the mitzvah.
Mm-hmm.
Comes to Kibud Av V'Eim, all of a sudden, B'chlal, Yiddishkeit focuses on hamaisa hu ha'ikar. Lo yamedrash ikar ela hamaisa. Hayem la'asaisa. Everything's about action. The mitzvahs are actions. Okay, kavana is nice as well, but the main thing is, I mean, if you have kavana, you have the best of intentions, and you don't do the mitzvah, nothing was accomplished. You do the mitzvah, even if it's shalei lishma, even if, I mean, certain mitzvahs, you do them accidentally. A person dropped money, and then a pauper found it. It's still a mitzvah of tzedakah. But there comes this one mitzvah. It's a funny thing, where all of a sudden, we're expected to have that level of emotional control.
So basically what you're saying is that let's take the scenario of the parent that just pops in, okay? And of course we said that every single person has to speak to their own Rav. You try to address the situation, and the reaction of the parent is, what do you mean? I'm your parent, I'm your mother, this is how we did it when we grew up, and you decide that maybe it's time for you to reach out to a Rav because it's getting complicated, and you do reach out to a Rav and you start putting those boundaries, and we'll talk a little bit about how to choose a Rav and how to contact one and what to say to them in order for us to be understood. So you mean to say is that when I say it, I just cannot say, I cannot share it with the parent when I make the boundary, that I'm disturbed by it?
It's 100% correct.
Okay, so can you give us an example of how that would sound without sounding disturbed?
Well, let me just say that this is a good rule with all boundaries. All boundaries should be implemented without any emotional heat. I remember one time I was speaking somewhere. I remember where it was, but it's not relevant to the story. And I was talking about anger. Kol hakoyes ki'ilu eved avodah zarah. Anyone who gets angry, our sages say, anyone who gets angry, it is as if he served idols. And there was a lady there who spoke up, and she was very, very emotional. And she said, "You're telling me not to get angry, but anger saved my life. Because I was in an abusive marriage for years, and I did not put any boundaries in place until I finally got angry, until I was able to be angry." So I heard that. First of all, when somebody is sharing something that personal, you never want to contradict them because, well, first of all, you can't contradict them because they're sharing their experience. So what are you supposed to say? No, that wasn't your experience. But second of all, I didn't even want to contradict the idea that she was proposing, that anger actually had its benefits, because I didn't want to, even though I don't agree with the idea, but I didn't want to contradict it because obviously it was a sensitive issue. So I didn't contradict it. I asked her a question. I said, "Do you wish, not that you can rewrite history, not that you can turn back the clock, do you wish that you had set boundaries earlier?"
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Of course I do. In retrospect, of course I do." I said, "And if you had set the boundaries earlier, do you think that you could have done so before becoming angry?" She said, "Yeah, well, then, of course. As soon as I felt something wasn't right, I would have had the ability to speak up." I said, "Aha." So it was the ability to communicate and speak what you needed to speak that saved you. It wasn't the anger that saved you. In fact, if you really think about it, might it not be true that even that boundary that you were finally able to put into place because you felt so angry that finally you just did it, but if you would have communicated that calmly, it would have been even more effective? She said, "Yeah, it's true."
So that goes into something completely different, which we're not really going to talk about now, but basically getting yourself emotionally grounded before you have to do something like that.
Yeah, but it's not different. It's one and the same. Because you see, chiyuvim in Torah and emotional health always go hand in hand. It's never like a coincidence. Oh, it happens to work out that it's the same thing. No, it's always the same thing. The same Eibishter who created the human mind, who created human psychology, looked into the Torah and created human psychology. So all of these things always dovetail. They always come together. So the idea that we're speaking specifically about parents, but I'm saying you could expand it. All boundaries are better implemented calmly. And by the way, I remember at this very same speech where this woman spoke up. So afterwards, there's a guy who got up, and he was on leave from the army, and he says, that's exactly what they teach us in the military, that even when you're in battle, or especially when you're in battle, that you cannot become emotional. You cannot become angry. You have to stay calm. They teach us how to, more or less, let's say it as it is. They're taught how to kill without anger. Why? Somebody who's never been in a battlefield thinks that angry soldiers are effective soldiers. That's not true. Anyone who's actually been in a battlefield knows calm soldiers are effective soldiers. So even when you have to do something drastic, even in a situation, God forbid, somebody has to take a life, even in that case, and especially in that case, it has to be done calmly. Now let's talk about putting in place a boundary, which is a lot more tame than taking someone's life. They might not like it. Some people might feel like you're killing them when you put up a boundary, but it's a lot less than killing or maiming or laying a hand on someone. It's just, and nevertheless, how effective is a boundary that we put up when we're so fed up and we're so disgusted and we're so frustrated that we just can't hold ourselves in anymore, compared to the boundary that we put into place after we've slept on it, we thought about it, we discussed it with people who are wiser than us, who are objective about our situation. Always more effective. So in this case of Kibud Av V'Eim, you're not even allowed to get emotional in front of your parents. But that's to your benefit. The fact you're not allowed to freak out and get emotional and get flustered in front of them about them. But that's to your benefit, because even if you have to, and especially you have to put up a boundary with them, it's going to be more effective if it's done calmly.
So I want to ask Rabbi Taub, because I really want to try to cover certain things in the short amount of time that we have left. When would you suggest that somebody, see, as a therapist, whenever it comes to working with parents in situations like that, I can never put that on my shoulders. It's something that I can help as a therapist, but I cannot help with halacha. And I always suggest reach out to your Rav, and many times when I say that, there's this like terror, there's like this expression of such fear, like, what do you mean? Who am I supposed to call? Like, what am I supposed to do? How are they going to understand me?
Right.
And, you know, number one, when do I know that I really need to ask someone? Number two is, how can I find somebody? Because I really need a Rav that understands. There are some incredible Rabbanim out there. Some of them are their specialties kashrus, and some of them are, you know, all different type of things. Like, how do I know where to do that? And also, how do I ask the questions so they understand what I'm saying? Many times we get so flustered and we're so afraid that we kind of like try to mumble and jumble the pieces and the words of our questions, and then they don't fully understand us, and therefore the response they give us doesn't really match what we asked.
Right. Okay. So, first of all, let's talk a little bit more about, and I want to, this is in order to answer the question you just asked, I want to back up a little bit to what I was just talking about, okay? But this is in order to answer your question. I want to elaborate a little bit more on this idea that you're not allowed to get frustrated even when your parents are totally out of line. That is the archetypical case of Kibud Av V'Eim, where the parents are totally out of line, and nevertheless, what is the example that's held up? You don't react, you don't get emotional, you don't show annoyance. Okay, fine. At the same time, by the way, all of these halachas, I shouldn't say all, but the main sugya in Gemara where it discusses this is in the Gemara in Kiddushin. And in that same Gemara where it discusses Dama ben Nisina's story, it talks about the story of an Amoira, Rav Asi, who had a mother who was also mentally not well, perhaps senile, whatever the case may be, but she was mentally unstable. And he left the country in order to not be in a position to fall short of his duties to her. So it's very interesting. On one hand, you're not allowed to get annoyed at your parents. And it's not just the story of Dama ben Nisina. I told you, it's codified, it's in Shulchan Aruch. This is held up as halacha. You're not allowed to react in a way that shows that you're annoyed. On the other hand, we have a story of an Amoira, no less, one of the sages, no less, who removed himself, who left the country with transportation and communication not being then at all what they were today, effectively cutting himself off from his parent, an elderly parent at that. So what do we see? If you're in a position where your parent does something that pushes your buttons, you're not allowed to show that it upsets you. However, you are allowed to avoid putting yourself in the situation.
So you're saying that part of the respect is that whatever it is that's happening, if you know that you're just going to lose it and you're not going to have peace of mind, and you're gonna, I don't know, emotionally just completely fall apart, then rather distance yourself from it than actually be in their presence.
Avoid.
That's more respectful.
That is more respectful. That is correct. So now let's answer your question. You're not going to ask a Rav, when am I allowed to tell my parents to shut up? Because the answer is going to be never.
Never.
Never. Well, when am I allowed to tell my parents how annoying they are? Never. You're never allowed to do that. Oh, but you don't know how annoying my parents are. It doesn't matter. You're not allowed to do that. You have to ask a better question. The question is, can I remove myself? Now, there are degrees, and this is the next thing I want to talk about here. There are degrees of removing yourself. Going no contact, completely cutting off from a parent, is the very last thing.
Worst case scenario.
Worst case scenario, and really shouldn't apply to the vast majority of even the most dysfunctional cases. It's extremely rare, extremely rare. Okay. Before that, there are all types of other degrees, much lower degrees of removing yourself. In other words, you can remove yourself from a situation, a particular place, and a particular time. Or even, I'll give you an even more tame example. You don't even have to remove yourself. You can limit the amount of time. You can say, I am going to go over to visit my parents, but I'm leaving after 5 minutes. Okay?
And that's a boundary for yourself.
And another thing, I want to make another point about boundaries with parents that also applies to all boundaries. I mentioned before, one great rule of boundaries that applies to all boundaries is that any boundary you can lay down out of anger and heat, you could lay down that same exact anger, that same exact boundary so much more effectively if you do it calmly and deliberately.
Which usually takes a lot of work and a lot of therapy sessions before you can do that.
Preparation, right? Because generally speaking, a boundary that you're going to come up with spontaneously, don't. Let it be deliberate. Let it be thought out. Let it be something you've been planning, and you're waiting for the right time and the right moment. And yes, in consult, it could be a therapist, but point to somebody objective, somebody who's guiding you. Okay, fine. So that was one rule I wanted to say about boundaries. Another rule I wanted to say about boundaries, which is applicable across the board for all boundaries, is boundaries are really, ultimately boundaries are not for other people, because we can't limit other people's behaviors.
It's for ourselves.
Boundaries are always for ourselves. We can't limit other people's behaviors. We can limit our behaviors. So I remember a woman once told me, she said, her husband was an alcoholic. She said, I set boundaries for him and they don't work. I said, what does that mean they don't work? Well, I told him he's not allowed to stay out all night drinking. And then he stayed out all night drinking. So the boundary didn't work. I said, that's not a boundary. A boundary isn't telling him what he ought to do, because you have no control over that. A boundary is letting him know what you're going to do. Now, it could be, usually it is, what I'm going to do in the context of what you do. Okay? So it's not like, by the way, tomorrow I'm going shopping. It's more like, by the way, if you get home at a certain time, the doors are going to be locked. Right? Okay. So it is a description of my behaviors in the context or in the scenario of what another person's behaviors are going to be, but it's a description of my behaviors. And another thing is, remember, the boundaries are not threats. There's nothing punitive about them. In other words, I'm not using the boundary to get leverage on you. So, sometimes we use a boundary. It's not really a boundary. It's an ultimatum. If you don't come home, I'm going to lock the door on you. Well, if you're saying it to motivate somebody, who knows if that will motivate, especially if you're talking to someone who's not well, there's a disease. You know, who says that you might be talking rationally, but that's not what they're hearing. So don't use a boundary as leverage or as a threat or an ultimatum or as a way of trying to rein in another person's behavior. A boundary is just simply a heads up. It's a description of, hey, by the way, just so we're on the same page, here are my behaviors. I just want you to know there's a certain scenario in which here's the way I'm going to be behaving. So you're telling somebody about yourself, and you better be telling the truth. You better be telling, in other words, if you say this is my boundary, you better mean it. And there's no excuse for not living up to it, because, again, I didn't tell you what you got to do. I told you what I got to do. I told myself this is what I got to do. Nobody can stop me from doing it because it's my boundary on me. So let's specifically to the discussion at hand.
I just want to give Rabbi Taub a heads up that we have 20 minutes left, and after an hour the live shuts off.
Okay.
So
time flies. Okay.
Yes, time flies. I just want to give you a heads up that you can finish off the example, but I really want to speak about the idea. I know that there were a lot of people that wanted to know more on the halachic aspect of how they can get a Rav, what they could say in order to be heard, and also a huge part is the religious guilt. You know, being afraid to ask, then they're going to think this of me or that of me, and am I allowed to do that? What if so and so finds out? Who's the right person for me to ask? There are a lot of questions around that.
Okay. So let me just finish up what I was saying before, then we'll get into that right away. Boundaries for yourself. Remember the previous question is about asking a shaila, going to a Rav. Okay. So basically, you're asking for permission to remove yourself from a situation or to limit your presence in a situation. So when you ask a better question, you're going to get a better answer. When you ask, am I allowed to not go to such and such thing, family function or whatever, that's a much better shaila than, I don't know, what's a clumsy way that people ask. Well, first of all, going way too extreme, that would be a poor way of asking the question. Like, my parents are dysfunctional, I never want to talk to them again. Nobody who doesn't know your story for a long time is ever going to just say, yeah, that sounds like, go for the nuclear option, go ahead. But so
I like that point. Basically, what I'm hearing you say is that it's important to have that Rav from the very beginning of your journey, whatever it is.
100%.
So you have that Rav from the beginning to the end, so they know different components and parts of the story.
We always say, don't go Rav shopping, right? That's for your benefit. If you go Rav shopping, that's to your detriment. And I want to explain why. When it comes to these sensitive issues, family issues, interpersonal issues, it's all about a relationship. Now, by relationship, I don't mean that the Rav is chas v'shalom meshuchad, that he gets to know you and like you, and then he favors you, and then he's easy on you. Chas v'shalom, that's what I mean. What I mean is, nobody's going to be able to hand out heterim when they don't know your situation. So the better they know you, the longer they know you for, the more different situations they know about. In other words, asking a Rav that you never spoke to before about anything but basa b'chalav, and now all of a sudden you ask about your personal life, is nothing compared to a Rav who has heard your shilas 4, 5, 6 times over the past year about, and knows that you have Yiras Shamayim, knows that you're trying to be sensitive, knows that you're trying to be careful, because you're asking the shaila. I just want to make another point. The religious guilt about asking the shaila, to the contrary. Rabbanim know that most people, unfortunately, don't ask shilas. People ask too many shilas, right? But when you're asking real shilas, because you have a genuine desire to do Hashem's will and you want to be a good Jew, a Rav knows that. But how do they know that that's what you do? They don't know that you asked 4 other Rabbanim in the past year. They only know if they were the same Rav that you asked 4 or 5 times.
Absolutely, again and again.
Shopping is to your detriment. Pick a Rav, any Rav, and let them get to know you. Because this is not about getting the answer that you want one time.
That's my
guidance.
But that's my next question is, how do people know who to ask? Because there are some Rabbanim that have more experience in this area. How would they know who to ask? Like my local rabbi, my shul may not have this experience.
Pirkei Avos says, Aseh l'charav. One of the meanings of Aseh l'charav, Aseh, make l'cha for yourself a rav. Make this person a rav. Give them that power. Turn them into a rav. And what I mean, don't look for the world's expert. Don't look for the person you think is the ultimate posek in this issue. I'll tell you why. Because ultimately, if there's a real sticky question and only the world's greatest posek in this issue can answer it, your Rav's going to call that person anyway.
Oh, I got it.
So cultivate a relationship with a Rav who knows you and knows your situation. In other words, pick somebody that you feel has Yiras Shamayim. That's number one. You have to feel they have Yiras Shamayim. Okay, that the number one criterion is that they put Hashem before people. Okay, so someone you feel has Yiras Shamayim. Second of all, somebody who's compassionate. If they have real Yiras Shamayim, automatically they'll be compassionate. But I'll say them as two different things, just because it needs to be said, even though it's redundant. Then, and obviously it's a real Rav. I mean, not this has to be someone who's qualified, who is a Rav. But again, they don't have to be the world's biggest expert in this issue. They don't have to be the person who's dealt with 100 other situations. All they have to do is know your situation. And if they have Yiras Shamayim and they have compassion and they are a Rav, they will become an expert, as much of an expert as they need to become in how to guide you.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask a different question is, what if, you think you found someone with these components, of someone that's a Yiras Shamayim, someone that's very compassionate, and someone that hopefully becomes your expert, and you've been burnt out by it, meaning the advice you've been given was harming you more than helping you. How are you supposed to pick yourself up and try to find somebody? I understand what you're saying, but I've had situations with different clients where they did speak to Rabbanim, and it's possible that maybe it was because they didn't know how to ask their questions, and maybe, like you said, they didn't cultivate that relationship over time, but were burnt from it, and were not led the right way, and therefore their shalom bayis got worse, their emotional health got worse. So what about that?
Yeah, but you just said the answer to that. I would say in those cases, it probably was A, they didn't know how to ask the shaila. B, they hadn't invested in a long-term relationship with that Rav. Now, if you're saying a person has emotional issues where automatically every Rav triggers certain reactions, okay, that's another, and that's valid, and that's a real thing. But
absolutely,
that's not the Rav's issue. That's your issue that you need to work on. Okay? All right. So if you have that issue, work on it. So let's set that aside. Now, once you go to the Rav, like I said, I'll repeat the 2 points. Know how to ask a shaila. All right? So again, the shaila is going to be, what do I have to do? What limitations can I place on myself? Can I remove myself from a situation? Can I limit my exposure to a situation? Then, that was the first point. The second point is, invest in a long-term relationship. Let this person get to know your reaction and your way of dealing with things over a prolonged period of time. So if you do those things, you are going to get good guidance. And if you make sure the person you ask has Yiras Shamayim and has compassion. Okay? So if you do all those things that I spoke of, you are going to get good guidance. Be'ezras Hashem.
Okay, now I have a very, another question that I wanted to speak about a little bit in the short time that we have is, what happens if part of somebody's struggle that they had with their parents, or had with their parents, had a lot of religious abuse in it, where everything was in the name of Torah, everything was according to halacha, and I've seen that a lot, and that's where the the religious guilt comes in, and the fear, and they, like many times, they have a very difficult time going, literally reaching out to, when you say reaching out to Rav, they literally go into like trauma mode. Right. So what about someone like that? How could they, any steps that they could do to be able to find somebody? And I understand what you said, that they should be Yiras Shamayim, they should be very compassionate, but for them to be able to actually call a Rav because they're so fearful and have gone through so much in that aspect.
Yeah, but that's not about finding the right Rav. If you still have those issues, then no Rav is going to be the right Rav.
So first resolve your issues around that.
Of course.
And then slowly work on steps to be able to connect to somebody.
Look.
I see we're getting a lot of responses to this. I don't know if you see the screen, but we're getting a lot of responses to that.
Let me put it like this. I don't know, what do you think I'm getting a lot of responses to? What do you think triggered?
Well, meaning the idea of being afraid to pick up the phone and call a Rav because of struggles that people have gone through within
right. So it has to
their,
be dealt
you know.
with. Obvious. Look, let me tell you something. In a normal situation, again, at the beginning of this talk, if everyone was here at the beginning, I don't know, but I'll repeat. We said we're going to use the term normal loosely because normal is a relative term. But let's say in a normal situation where you have normally messed up parents, right? Because I said that all parents are messed up. Why do I say that? Because I'm a parent and I know, right? We all mess up our children. The question is, are you normal messed up or abnormally messed up? Okay, fine. But let's say you have normally messed up parents and a normally messed up childhood. Do you know the typical thing? Every child goes through separating Yiddishkeit from their parents. Mm-hmm. That everyone goes through that. That my parents' Yiddishkeit is not my Yiddishkeit. Everyone has to forge that personal relationship with Hashem. That on one hand, this is my tradition. I was born into this. I was raised with this. This is a golden chain going back to the Aves, the Emois. On the other hand, first and foremost, Zeh Keli. This is my personal God. Zeh Elokei Avi, then it also happens to be Elokei Avi, my father's God, but I'm Menuhu. But first and foremost is my God. First and foremost, it's my personal relationship. And everybody goes through that, generally speaking, in adolescence. That's a normal thing that every teenager goes through, where you realize, even if your parents were emotionally healthy and spiritually healthy, religiously healthy, you come to a point, you say, you know what, my relationship with Hashem is my relationship. And you make that distinction. Now, we're talking about an abnormal situation where that didn't happen, and a person is an adult, and they're still confused about what's really Yiddishkeit and what's my parents' mishigas, okay? That has to be figured out. That has to be figured out. And I would make that priority number one. Absolutely. Because, like I said earlier, and I'll repeat it again, there's no such thing as this is what Torah says and this is what's good for your mental health. They're never in contradiction. There can't be two different things. The same Eibishter who gave the Torah created your mind, designed human psychology. If Torah says it's good, it's good. You have to understand what Torah is saying, but Torah is always good. Torah is always right. And there's no contradiction. So what I'm saying is, if you need to do a lot of emotional healing because you had an abnormally messed up childhood, one of the I should be more confident than saying one of. I'm hedging right now when I say one of. No, let me be more confident. The foundation of your emotional healing, your mental healing, is going to be your spirituality. So don't wait to work on repairing that relationship with Hashem, because that relationship with Hashem, that's your rock. That's your stability. You're going to build all of your emotional growth on that relationship with Hashem. In other words, a person who comes into therapy already knowing that I have a personal relationship with Hashem, that whatever people did, that's people. But Hashem is there for me. Now you have a foundation. Now you have something to build on. And I see this over and over and over again.
But oftentimes it will take time, especially if somebody had went through a lot of childhood trauma and there was religious abuse. It will take a lot of time for them to get to that place. Oftentimes they will come in and they will not, like, they say, find their God of their understanding, and there will not be any connection. That will be a journey. And I like what somebody posted here. They said every person should have a therapist and a Rav. A Rav should not be your therapist. And I agree with
that.
that.
Oh, by the way, let me echo something about that. So I skipped this. I overlooked it. We were talking about asking a Shaila. Mm-hmm. Another important point. When you go to a Rav, you don't expect them to be an expert in everything. You expect them to be an expert in halacha, right? Okay. So, for instance, if you ask a medical question, you don't expect them to understand what the newest medical technologies are. That's ridiculous. What you would do is you would come to a Rav and say, my doctor said such and such. Based on that information, a Rav can give you an answer. So having a Rav and having a therapist is important for another reason. When you ask a Shaila, it's so much more clear and so much more helpful and so much easier for a Rav to give good guidance if you say, my therapist said, and then say it in one sentence, okay? Now, you're not telling a Rav what to pasken. You're not bossing them around. It's not like saying, my therapist said, now you got to sign on to it. That's not what you're saying. My therapist said. But it's so much more helpful when you can come and say, it's not just my feelings. It's not just me. I'm in therapy. Here's what the therapist said. And
how can we go about this?
And then put it in the Rav's court. Now you're giving them the ability to help you.
So basically what I'm hearing you say is you're really summing up how to ask a question, how to pick up the phone when you have the capacity to do that, and you don't have that trauma and fear of actually connecting to a Rav, and you've worked through that, and how to actually ask that question. Now, we have literally 4 minutes left, and I wanted to give you a little bit of time to speak about something else, but I wish we could just go on and on about this. There's so many different parts of this that it's such a huge topic. It's so difficult to just throw it into like 1 hour and try to, mumble jumble. I hope that we were able to give a little bit of, I would call it psychoeducation, or a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of awareness. And I want to say this again, that every single person's situation, every person is a world of its own, and every person's situation is different. So I want to add this part also, like if you have your Rav and your Rav guided you in a certain way, and you meet up with so-and-so in some support group, or you get to know them, you cannot give them the same guidance and say, well, listen, this is what you got to do. This is what my rabbi told us to do. You should do that too. Every single person has to have their own Rav and their own guidance, and there's, it seems to me that there's halachos particularly to each individual case. So thank you so much, Rabbi Taub. And what I want to just ask you to finish off this live is if you could please tell us a little bit about your WhatsApp group and your website in the few minutes that we have left.
Oh, wow. Thanks for giving me some of the time. We have a WhatsApp broadcast. The website is called soulwords.org, where my classes and my lectures are posted regularly. And then we have a WhatsApp broadcast, Soul Words videos, little 4 or 5 minute videos, sometimes shorter, that come out a couple times a week. You know what? I don't even know the number for it. Do you?
Yes, I actually wrote down the number somewhere. Hold on. I'm going to give you the phone number right now. Rabbi Taub, what is the WhatsApp group about?
Well, it's it could be anything. It's clips from different talks that I've given at different times, and some of the highlights, some of the moments. Where there's a little nugget, something that can be summed up in a few minutes. And it covers all types of topics, all types of points, Yeah,
I'm just going to give the number quickly. It's 516-495-3021. If anyone's interested in the website and the WhatsApp broadcast phone number is 516-495-3021. I'm going to save the live for 24 hours. So if you didn't have a pen on you and you want to remember it, we will save it and you will be able to record the number yourself. But thank you so much, Rabbi Taub, for your expertise and your information and your clarity on these different things that we spoke about. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for giving us a Torah perspective. As a professional, I try to add that into my therapy, but I am a therapist and I am far from a rabbi. And I think it's also important to know for anyone out there that if you're seeing a therapist and you're dealing with any family situation, whether it's with a parent or whatever it is, you should also find yourself a Rav. Your therapist should have a Rav that she or he should consult with, because it's something that we cannot take upon ourselves and do on our own, being when we are serving the Jewish community, especially the Orthodox Jewish community. That's so important. And remember that every single case is individualized. There's no one size fits all, and everybody has to speak and ask their Rav according to who they are. The point of us discussing it was just to bring about some information, bring about how we're supposed to do this, what we're supposed to do, how to reach out to a Rav, what am I supposed to do, how am I supposed to ask the question so they should understand me clearly.
So what else do we do now? We have like a minute left.
Wait for it to shut down. Thank you everybody for joining, and I'm definitely going to try to save it. And if anyone has any questions that they were kind of left over with after the live, they didn't get a chance to ask, you're more than welcome to send me some private messages, and we'll try to answer them the best that I'll try to answer the best that I can, and I'll ask Rabbi Taub if I need a little help on his end. Okay, but thank you so much, everybody. And like I said, it's a very big topic, and there are so many other parts that I wanted to speak about, but an hour is just like a little dot.